Game changers. Welcome to At the Desk with Dr. KwA, where transformation begins with conversation. Today's conversation is one that sits at the core of opportunity in education, equity in mathematics. For decades, math has functioned as both a gateway and a gatekeeper. Access to rigorous math instruction often determines college pathways, career trajectory, and long term economic mobility. But the question remains, who truly has access? Pulling up a seat at the desk today is Dr. Myla F. Simmons, a veteran educator and level mathematics leader with over 21 years of experience across charter, urban, suburban, and traditional public school systems. Her work, including doctoral research, focused specifically on equity in mathematics education, which challenges us to rethink how systems either expand or restrict opportunity. Dr. Myla Simmons, welcome to the desk.
Thank you. Hello, Dr. Kwa. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Good to have you here. I'm excited to have you here because we get the opportunity to talk about one of our favorite subjects, math.
Yeah.
You and I have both been math practitioners, and eventually have made our way to the positions of leadership. And so let's start the conversation looking at your journey, right? Let's look at you from your journey standpoint. Um, Urban, suburban. I mean, you've done the whole dance, right? From Georgia
Yes.
to Spelman, Georgia, and all of those places in between. How has this journey and varied contexts informed your practice and what you have your experience as a district leader practitioner?
So my journey began in Spelman College in Atlanta. So I decided to stay in Atlanta for a few years, 2 years afterwards. So I started off in an affluent district that was 100% African American, and
Okay.
that really kind of shaped my idea of equity because moving forward, my educational experience has always been in Title I districts that had lower social economic status. And the same, I'm dealing with the same demographic as far as their ethnicity, but the outcomes were different amongst the two groups. And one of the things that later, when I was working on my master's degree, one of my professors said is that test scores are really always related to a student's socioeconomic status and whether or
Mm,
not their parents had graduated college. And
wow.
that's really what I saw when I was teaching in Stone Mountain. And, I had lawyers and former basketball players as parents. There were
Okay.
a lot of things that their affluential status allowed them to do. They were more in the school. They were able to be more present. It was a theme school, so they had to do volunteer hours, but they always were doing above and beyond that. And
Okay.
so it's funny how we put a lot on test scores, but really it's your social economic status that has a lot to do with it, and it definitely is not ethnicity, because like I said, both groups, whether when I was in Stone Mountain, it was black students, as well as when I've been in my New Jersey districts, it has been African American students as well as Hispanic.
So socioeconomic status definitely has a huge impact on scholars' acumen with mathematics, or I would venture to say with anything else as far as education is concerned.
Yes. Really
Okay.
focusing on their access to it. So when you have affluential status, you are able to do more things. Like I said, even the parents just being able to be present in the school more
Mm,
was a value add. Whereas
right.
a lot of our parents in other districts cannot be at the school, cannot volunteer and do that and provide that type of time.
That's powerful. So when we talk about achievement gaps, you're suggesting that we should instead examine opportunity gaps then.
Yes, yes.
Because opportunity, as a quote unquote middle class, I have the resources to make sure that my son gets tutoring when he needs it. My son can go to the after school program that's specifically designed outside of the school for a collection of my friends and I, or my child's friends and his buddies and their parents decide, you know what, all y'all gonna be part of this after school program, and that's basically the end of that story, and you're gonna like it.
Exactly,
And
exactly. There I had people paying, hundreds of dollars for Huntington, Kumon,
wow,
all of those things because
wow,
they had the
the
money for
means.
it. So
Oh, wow,
yeah.
that is so fascinating. So I want to look at mathematics as a gatekeeper, right? Uh, Oftentimes, is math often determines who gets access to advanced coursework, STEM pathways, scholarships. In your view, how has mathematics historically functioned as a gatekeeper?
So in order to get a lot of the jobs that you need, like STEM, like you're talking about, even being a doctor, I remember going to college and I was majoring in mathematics, and some of my pre med students or pre med colleagues or whatever, they were scared of taking math classes, and a lot of it again goes back to mindset. Someone told them they weren't good at math early on, and
Mm-hmm.
so they were like, "Okay, I'm ready to be a doctor, but I got to
Right.
take calculus." And so it it
If
has a
you would
lot
not
to do
know,
with.
I'm chuckling only because when you say that, I remember being in my math classes that I was teaching, and kids like, I'm not good at math. And I've even heard colleagues, oh, I don't know, I don't like math. And I always ask, do you like money? And then all of a sudden, like, I like money. Well, you better learn to love math, right? But yeah, so I'm sorry, continue.
No, but that is the case, and that's especially the case when we deal with elementary education because a lot of times our elementary educators are not like content specific. And so when they have that mindset of they're not good at math, they can be passing that on to our students. The idea like I'm just not a good math student, but there is no
Mm,
such thing as a good math student.
right,
In actuality, you really have to be able to critically think, and that's what we want all of our students to be able to do. And there's a lot of problem solving that kids can do that gets overlooked. And one of the things that my research showed me was that is a lot of focus on basic skills. And so we spend
mm,
a lot of time, making sure our students know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. But that's not actually what algebra entails. And even the whole idea of the new math when we moved to Common Core, that
right,
was the idea of building algebra readiness as early as kindergarten, making sure students could think and no longer worried about skill and drill type stuff. But our teachers haven't really gotten out of that mindset. And
right,
so they still are kind of focused on those skills. So a lot of times by third grade, they're like, you haven't memorized your multiplication facts. You're not going to be a good math student. And then this
right.
kid is in high school still thinking because I can't speed off my multiplication facts.
Mm,
I can't do algebra
mm,
too.
mm. Valid points. And again, being in the system, we've seen it at play. We've watched it play out. We hear it, and I think that's a conversation, an aspect of this conversation that I probably want us to like. What can we do differently when we, as instructional leaders, hear a teacher or a colleague make comments like that, right? Because that pedagogy deficiency with respect to mathematics, I think, has a huge impact on this equity conversation that we're having, right? So we're talking about in your urban, rural, because we're not going to touch the affluent and suburban areas because those folks have resources and means, but where the means are limited, right? There seems to be unconscious uh focus on skill and drill, right? And so that creates begins the process of creating that gap. Um, you mentioned, the fact that, some educators fear that I guess rigor will be, in essence, rigor will be watered down, right? And I think that's what's
Hmm.
happening uh within our school settings, especially K6 or K5, because those are the foundational years where kids are excited about wanting to learn about the content. But when you have a practitioner going, well, I don't like math, or embarrasses you because you confidently raise your hand thinking you got the correct answer, and they shoot you down and like, no, so those things play. Um, what can we do, or better yet, help our audience and us all collectively um, kind of unpack this fear of rigor?
I'm glad you mentioned that teacher that kind of like shoots a student down when they may have a wrong answer. So
Hmm.
one of the things that from the whole charter school concept is that book Teach for a Champion. It has a lot of things in there, a lot of ideas. But one of the big ones that I took from it was building a culture for error.
Mm,
And I think in all math classes, that's important, starting as early as kindergarten, is making sure that students know that their mistakes are an opportunity for them to learn
absolutely.
and progress, and not shooting them down when they're not correct, and really saying, well, how can we look at that again? Or, show me what you did. What is your thinking? So that we can work on their thinking and getting them to the process of how they could understand the problem correctly. And it builds a way where more students are willing to raise their hands, because
Mm-hmm.
if you notice, as I've taught, all the way through middle school, elementary through middle school, younger kids raise their hand a lot more. They are more willing to say whatever, whenever. But
Right,
as they
because
get to
they're
middle
not
school, they get quieter.
right. But by the time they get to middle school, they've been shot down by somebody, or somebody might have, or they might have observed or witnessed somebody get shoot down. So as a consequence, that's not going to happen to me. I'm not raising my hand for nothing, right? You're not going to embarrass me in front of my classmates. But that is so crazy, and I think I had a former guest that you and I both worked with, and one of the things I always enjoyed about her class, you talked about building in that opportunity for error, as creating the environment where scholars can take academic risk without it feeling like, oh my God, the world is coming to an end by a practitioner. And this particular colleague you and I worked with, she's created and fostered that type of environment. So it was always a joy walking into her class, because some of the kids that you and I both know, like, boy, you better go somewhere and try that again. But they were in there like hands up and just giving it their all. And I'm going, wow, that classroom environment, the setting, the structure, that opportunity to make an error and not be crucified for it, I think is a great space to foster for all scholars, K through 12, really. But if we can tighten that up in the K-6 segment before they get into middle and high school, I think we will probably we'll begin the winning process of getting our scholars where they need to go. So that said, I want to tap into your research a little bit. Okay. Your research examines structural and instructional practices that influence equitable access to high quality mathematics learning. What were your most significant findings?
So it was my research is really on trying to make sure that students have early access to algebra, looking at
Hmm.
that whole eighth grade algebra segment, and how many students are able to actually access that. So in my findings, I found that there was a lot of teacher perception that was holding students back from being able to be recommended for those courses, and that was
Wow.
happening as early as sixth grade.
Wow.
So you
Wow.
have teachers really making decisions about students that are not even grades. When we talk about grading, what goes into a grade? If a teacher puts a lot of foundation on homework, which I'm not a believer in homework, I'll tell you right now.
I'm
I didn't
trying
have
not
to
to
do it
get
when I was a kid to be able to
right,
pass, and I'm like,
right. Try not to get into the principal space now. Woosah. Like, you that's all you
but
grading is homework?
exactly. But that's what it can lead to. Your A student may be just a student who can comply to certain things and is not really able to think outside the box like that. But where you have a
Right.
student who's like, you know what, I'm not spending, an hour doing 100 problems that you gave me when I already showed you I knew how to do it out after five. I'm just not
Mm.
doing that.
Right.
That was me.
Right.
So,
Drill
but
and
give me
kill,
the
right?
test, I'll pass the
And kill.
test.
Drill and kill.
Yes,
I gotta do 100 more of these. I just did the first two efficiently. Like, that wasn't enough. Like, you learn how to drive,
exactly.
but you gotta do the test over and over and over again until we give you a license. You know. I want to share some what and I want you to. I'll get back to your research as well, because there were some things that I wanted to kind of glean from you. But here's what other research elements you know brought to the forefront. Right, the fact that the top 10% of socioeconomically well versed individuals tend to be 4 grade levels ahead of those of us, or those scholars who are at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. You also find that tracking and ability grouping, by and large, tends to create segregation. right? And that's a problem that we don't need. We do not need that. Implicit bias and lower expectations of our scholars, right, also leads to denial of access, as you just mentioned, right? Teachers are doing things and not really engaging scholars in the full way that they can be and being challenged so that recommendations are not as a consequence recommendations are not being made for those high level math courses that are available in not all spaces but in most spaces, right? You have some kind of advanced course that's available. And then, the other thing is also just the um cultural disconnection of our scholars because they don't see themselves represented in the math curriculum or in that space. And so that lends itself to the continual narrative of I'm not good at math or I don't like math. Um, I'm going to say something that might be considered controversial, but you know, growing up, I had buddies who were in the drug game. These jokers can do conversions of metrics of all
Yeah.
things. The US don't mess with metrics too much, but we want to do everything separate from the rest of the world. But like jokers can convert and like this, and I'm going, dude, how do you talk about you're not a math person? Then how are you doing this? You know, but
Hmm.
these are just some of the findings, the things that are happening that kind of causes me to say, you know what, we need to pause on how things are being done. So, when you talk about structural barriers, what can you share about the structural barriers that you encountered in your research?
So, even looking at the whole idea of tracking cause and segregation.
Hmm.
So, when we provided, like, I looked at research in California where they had algebra all for all an initiative where everybody was getting eighth grade algebra. And
Okay.
the interesting part about that was it created a new track because then there started being students who they had going into geometry.
Mm.
And those students were taking eighth grade geometry, and they tended to be more Asian students who were being pushed into that category. So there was still some type of segregation that started to take place.
Okay.
So I do believe the tracking does need to be taken out altogether, and that everyone needs access to the rigorous curriculum. At this point, if we're saying that in order for you to be able to get to advanced math courses, you need to take eighth grade algebra, everyone should be taking eighth grade algebra. The middle school
Absolutely.
system should be set up so that sixth, seventh grade prepares you for algebra at eighth grade. And that way you have the opportunity to take, statistics, calculus, pre-calculus once you're in high school. And even college algebra is something that you can take in high school that will allow you to be college ready to be able to pass that course.
Right.
Um,
But
and
those are
could be
those are
available, but if you don't have those classes before, you won't be able to get there.
right. But the challenge of that is also, you talk about inconsistency in curriculum implementation, right? Which lends itself to all of this. So as a consequence, you talk about taking courses in high school and to ready you for college. Not all these high schools offer some of the courses that need, they'll give you a math, but the level of rigor, the level of intensity associated with it might not be where it needs to be, especially depending on where you're attending school, right? And that's part of the challenge. Um, what would you say in terms of professional learning gaps associated with this whole dynamic?
I think that our professional learning really needs to look at implicit bias and understanding it. One of the things that I did as part of my study was listing, the teachers had to list like seven of their closest people in their lives that were not family. So no one that's biologically related to you. And one
Hmm.
of the things that that brought out was, you tend to hang around people who look like you. Like there were groups where most of the people were female. They were
Hmm.
all, if you were black, they were black. If you were white, they were white. And so just acknowledging that because we tend to surround ourselves with like-minded people, that we are going to have some ideas that are based on that, which is what implicit bias is. And
Mm.
so you have to acknowledge it to be able to work with it.
And that's that group think, right? Because if I'm hanging with you, we think a certain way, we behave a certain way, even though we don't think we are. We
So,
unintentionally do it, and it's sometimes difficult to kind of get. Um, so equity is not just a classroom issue; it's, I think, a leadership issue. And so when we start talking about this, let's look at systems and leadership implementation. You know, as a K-12 math supervisor, you focus heavily on professional learning, curriculum implementation. What would you say district leaders must prioritize if they are serious about equitable mathematics outcome?
Sticking to grade level curriculum pacing. So, we get all excited, especially in our, urban districts about things that like iReady, which can tell you, where the student's grade level is. So if
Mm-hmm.
they're in middle school and they're currently working at a fourth grade level, that's great for intervention purposes.
Right.
But our tier one instruction should be at grade level. So we shouldn't get too far into looking at those things and focusing on them. Those are our interventions. And yes, when we're doing small group instruction, we can do
Right.
that. But
Right.
it's important for our teachers to stay on pace with the curriculum guide and expose our students to the grade level standards. Because otherwise, there's no way for them to be ready for these end of the year assessments if they haven't been taught it.
Mm. And oftentimes, when does that happen? You find that the teaching of certain content elements don't usually happen until when? A month or two before testing
The test.
begins, right? And
Hmm.
so that's part of the challenge. So uh with that, how do we get practitioners to stay on point with that? What will it require, I guess, from leadership standpoint to make sure that teachers are staying up to par with the pacing of the content, and additionally being able to ensure that what needs to be covered within the scope of time in advance of the assessment, state standards, standardized assessments, that's in play.
So I've been working with one of your previous guests as well, who was on here about testing and data. And we developed a curriculum guide that is detailed day by day and has
Hmm.
150 days prior to the NJSLA. And so one of the things that's really important is keeping up with that and making sure that teachers are maintaining as well as building administrators so they have access to it and they can see, okay, today is day 120 and you're not on this, you're 2 weeks behind. And so
Oof.
the fact that everybody in the district is on the same page with this curriculum pacing guide is what
Hmm.
is going to help us push to make sure that those standards are there, and also making sure that we're pushing those teachers away from things like, I'm in elementary school now and I'm seeing these drill and kill sheets as 40 minutes of an 80-minute block. And it's like, that didn't add anything to what we were doing. But they're like, they don't know. No, but they need to know these standards. And the standards don't say what's on that teacher pay teacher sheet that you gave them. That's not what's addressing the standards.
Yeah, those sheets. Mm. Ooh, ooh, and sigh. Try not to go into principal space. Ooh, and sigh. Like, what the heck? Anyway, all right. Um, so when we start talking about leadership and all of the things associated with that, right? Here's what something I want to just kind of get our leaders to process. If a superintendent is out there listening or watching, what is the first courageous decision they need to make?
Okay, that was a good that's a good question.
No,
I
no,
think
because listen, because oftentimes a lot of these decisions are contingent upon that particular leader believing in what you're bringing to them, right? And understanding the value add that it will be to what it is that the district goals are and you're trying to achieve. So what would be the first courageous decision you would think, if you had the stroke and you got somebody's ear and they're willing to, like, whatever you tell me, Dr. Simmons, we're gonna move with it because we believe is the appropriate thing to do, is good for our scholars, and is going to move us as a district in the direction we need to go. What would be that courageous decision?
I think sticking to a plan. So once we've developed a plan, so for example, one of the issues that we're having right now is we've developed this 150-day curriculum guide before testing, but then the testing, the people who plan the testing calendar are
Uh huh.
not associated with that guide. And so they're, moving up the testing because they're more concerned about, which is in their realm. Their scope is their
Right.
idea of, we want to make sure all the students can do the test, can do makeup. So they want to
Right.
extend the makeup time. But My mindset is let's make sure that the curriculum is covered before we hand them the test. And so I think as a superintendent, being able to lock in on, all right, this is the plan that we identified, and making sure that
Mm-hmm.
all of the key stakeholders are on to this plan and understand. So there's no one, kind of cutting us off at the knees or whatever with, okay, we're going to do this test 2 weeks earlier than we originally planned because that's when the testing cycle opened, even though you have a window that could go a little bit later.
Okay. So with that, would you also recommend or encourage them to do away with the things that we've said create this gap, right? This equity gap that we've been talking about. Would you advise them to do away with tracking and possibly do some auditing of your your advanced enrollment protocols, right? Um, what is it that's required for Kwame to sit in an algebra class or advanced algebra class or a geometry class, right? Calculus, whatever the content, the subject area might be. And I will even go further and say make sure that we align the resources to all of those things, right?
Exactly.
Um, so moving us through this, I was gonna pledge you for a second, but I decided I'm not gonna do that to you because I know you were a little. You comfortable now?
I
The
am
nervousness is
comfortable.
gone. Okay, it's not. We
Yes.
could we get our
Because I
arguments?
actually want to go back to one of your to one of your about the superintendent. I would love to be able to say to a superintendent, let's just get rid of and go through sixth, seventh, and have eighth grade algebra. The problem is if we don't build up the K6 or K5 before, there's
Mm-hmm.
no. I would be doing a disservice to those students trying to
Okay.
push them like that. So it's really important that we build a plan that's going to address the needs at the early age so that
Okay.
students are prepared to be in algebra early. And the Common Core really has done that. So it's really just, hey, teaching those standards that they've identified.
Stick to the plan. Follow the
Yeah.
plan. Make sure the plan is implemented with fidelity. That was always a challenge. That was always a challenge. Moving into instructional practices that advance equity, right? Um, let's bring in the classroom. What does equitable mathematics instruction actually look like?
So, as a teacher, you really have to make decisions that and again, you have to understand where your biases may lie. So, even with making sure that you're being equitable when you choose students who raise their hand, a lot of times boys are perceived to be good at math. So, you have
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that you're not calling on the student or pushing the girl student in your class that needs to answer questions too and needs to have feel like she's able to respond. You also have to be careful with the things that you're choosing. Teachers have a lot of control. We do build a curriculum, but the type of questions that they choose is pretty much up to them within their classroom. So you want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that you're not deciding, oh, this problem is going to be too hard for my class, or this problem is going to be too hard for this group of students. That's you not being giving them equitable access to the curriculum because you've already kind of watered it down. Even taking the questions from the book, sometimes they'll do that, like pull out the fractions, like, oh no, they're not ready for fractions, so I'm gonna change this to whole numbers. Those are all things that are making it so that your students don't have access to a rigorous curriculum.
Does that they're not ready for this? I'm pulling this out and I'm pulling that out. Does that sometimes also is that a tell sign on the practitioner's acumen with respect to the content, especially at the lower
Yes.
level? That was
Yeah.
an emphatic
Sometimes
yes.
it's like they don't know how to they're like, I don't know how to teach this. So
So
let's
therefore,
just
we're all not going to know it, right? Because I don't know it. Everybody in here, you're with me. We're not going to learn how to do this together. Okay.
exactly.
Ooh, Lord, I don't want to. I want to see classrooms doing come alive, but who? What else can be incorporated into the classroom setting to advance this conversation of equity? One, two, afford scholars opportunity to also see themselves reflected in the content.
So that we've been working on that too with building culturally responsive curriculums and trying to make sure that they're there. I think that is Something that I have kind of struggled with the concept of mathematics. I'm like, I look at mathematics books and I'm like, yeah, they have pretty pictures and things like that. And it's important for us to, use names that are culturally relevant. But really, the whole idea of being having curriculums that are related to cultural ideas, I struggle with that. I think that because sometimes I'm just like, well, the math is the math. So that is one of the places where I know that I have some learning to do and growing with.
Mm-hmm.
I have looked at the idea of social justice for mathematics, and I think that leans more towards middle school, high school, really
Okay.
looking at problems that are dealing with social justice and understanding, like, even the idea of sharecropping and understanding what sharecrop math was like and why that was not a beneficial way to farm. Like, those are things that would be more into the adolescence. So for elementary, I'm beyond making sure that we have diverse representation in our word problems and diverse representation in our pictures and things like that. I'm not really sure what it looks like at that
Okay,
growth rate.
so I first of all, I appreciate your honesty because a lot of individuals will come on here and proud pretend, oh, I don't make mistakes and I'm perfecto. I got, but that's real. That's real. That's honest, right? That this is an area. There's a gap here that I need to work on. What I would say to that end is that we need to make sure that we have those real world experiences, right? Culturally responsive or relevant problem context, and I think you mentioned that, right? So those are elements that kind of help with scholars beginning to see themselves. Additionally, affording scholars the multiple solution outlet, right? Because some practitioners, if it's not done the way I did it, even
Right.
though we arrive at the same answer, you know, I'm getting beat over the head because I came from it from the left side and it has to be down the middle.
Hmm.
And so those are elements, that I think will definitely help within the instructional setting. And so with that, what I would say is, what does in that, or better yet, after we've this conversation here, what I want to know from you is, what does inequitable math instruction look like to you?
So mainly teaching on grade level. Like, the main thing is that I'm going to see you engaging students in discussion, mathematical discourse. There's going to be reasoning and modeling going on within that classroom. You're building a culture for error. So there are students explaining, like, even when they didn't do it correct, they're up at the board ready to tell you, well, this is exactly how I got it. I did this step, this step, this step. And they're comfortable talking about the mathematics. And that's the only way that we'll be able to really build successful students, is them being able to have that mathematical discourse and talk about their problem solving.
And so the absence of any of that, we will consider inequitable.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So then we need to take also taken out of the equation is procedural memorization, right? Those elements.
Yes.
Right. Low
Because I
cognitive.
mean, the biggest thing as a math supervisor and just like people knowing I've been a math teacher, my friends are always asking me like, "Oh, you know the percent, you know the percent." I'm like, I don't know anything that fast. Give me a second. This idea of speed, I'm like, there's no race. when,
and I
when,
th-
when are
and
we going to have a race?
you want speed? Let's get that calculator to do it for us. That's what it's invented for, right?
Exactly.
But if you
Exactly.
ask
I know
me,
you probably experienced that as a math teacher too.
hey,
Like, people
listen,
always
when
like,
you
no, you
ask
you know the
me,
math.
it depends on what you ask me and what my where my head is. It's like I'll put everything on like break on everything. And go, oh yeah, math. Uh, pivot. Yeah. What did you want to know? Like people be like, what? Oh, there's a sale on such and such. It's 25%. What is that? Oh, it's 15%. What is that? And I'm going, I'm not thinking about that. My head was on some other stuff. And now you expect, like, well, you're a math person. What would it be? Okay. Slow down, slow down, slow down. But what
Exactly.
the other thing I want to kind of also make sure that we point out as inequitable with respect to this conversation, that low cognitive demand task, we need to take that out of the equation, right? Um, Teacher centered classrooms. And now you mentioned that, right? Let's get some debates. Let's get some scholars doing the explaining versus a teacher doing the explaining. When these things are at play and scholars get to see themselves and see each other, right? Um, Defending their responses with confidence, all that's doing is building that building block and foundation needed for the next level of math course or advanced math uh, rigor that we are hoping that they could get into. All right. We're moving kind of quickly here, aren't we? We will get
So to
there.
cover, because I talk fast too. I'm, I'm trying
Speedy
to
Gonzalez,
slow
but I
down.
wasn't gonna say nothing.
But so one of the other things that I brought as a K-12 math supervisor to the district is Peter Liddell's Building Thinking Classrooms. And so
Okay.
that's this idea of vertical learning where the students are standing in groups of three that are randomly selected and they're doing problem solving together. There's one marker, so it kind of leads to you needed to talk to the group because the other person can't write without telling you what to write.
Mm-hmm.
Those are some of the things that we've been trying to build problem solving that, and it lends to mathematical discussion. You have to talk amongst this group of three. And it really has helped at the middle school with getting students more opportunities to engage in the mathematics no matter what level they are, because the
Okay.
random grouping is
Okay.
also random to the teacher.
Mm.
So that makes it so they're not, choosing this one to go, let me make this high group and this. No, this is completely random. And a lot of times, it helps when the students have an opportunity to engage with students that are maybe higher than them or
Right.
a little lower, because that builds out that, and especially when you have a culture for error and y'all feel comfortable talking, it allows for you to really have good debate and to have good
Absolutely.
mathematical discourse.
So my question to you, how are the practitioners receiving this change in structure?
So at the middle schools, I've had a lot of success with it, but in the areas where I found at the middle school, mainly the drawback for it is teachers without the best classroom management steer away from
Okay.
it. They just are not comfortable with, they feel like
They
their
don't
their
want to
class is not going
release.
to be in control. Yeah.
Okay.
and and it probably won't, but that's a different issue. It's really the classroom
Right.
management issue that you need to work on, and really having some better procedures and protocols in your classroom so that you can let the students go out. And this process kind of defronts the classroom too, where the teacher is just moving around from group to group. They're no longer the
Facilitator.
sage on the stage.
They
So that
become the
also takes some
facilitator.
releasing.
Nice.
Hmm.
Nice. Well, the other conversation around just management of the instructional setting, without that being in place soundly, it makes it very difficult for a practitioner to even explore this idea of random pairings or groupings to be able to do some of the things that you're talking about. Okay, okay, I like that. I like that. Questions for me so far? You good? You still getting into your comfort zone? You feeling irie?
I'm there. I'm good. I'm
Okay,
good.
she's there because I got a smile out of it. Yes. All right. Let's look at mindset and identity in mathematics, right? So there's also the issue of math identity. So who believes they are a math person, right? And I think we kind of touched on it a little bit. How do schools shape that identity? How do you think schools shape that identity?
So we're still dealing with a lot of schools that have fixed mindset. Even the whole idea of tracking is a fixed mindset, because you're
Mm-hmm.
believing that, all right, I have to group these students into a lower cohort because there's no way for them to get out of that. So not having a growth mindset is an issue. I think that we are continue to work on. We've started to acknowledge it. There's more workshops about it and things that will help teachers understand it. But we
Yeah.
have to believe that everyone can do the work, that everyone can do the mathematics and can be at a higher level. And so once we have that, then that will kind of push ourselves into having less of that identity of I'm not good at math. Because if we believe that everyone has the ability to grow, you can be good at math.
But so in addition to that, what I will also say is that we also need to look at teacher messaging, right? I think the messaging is critically important because um, if as a scholar you happen to be my favorite teacher and I hear you saying I'm not good at math or I don't like math or this new math is blah blah blah, right? influencing, messaging, right? Well, if the adults around me feel this way about this, then why should I even waste my time and energy trying to put forth some effort towards that process? Um, Early labeling, I think, is
Mm-mm,
a
we don't
problem,
want any of that.
huh?
Yeah. I said, yeah, we don't want that.
We don't want that either. Yes, and then of course representation in STEM. I think that's critically important. And uh, so when we talk about equity, again, it's not just only access, but also affirmation, right?
Yes.
We need to affirm, yes, you can be a mathematician. Yes, you could be this scientist. Yes, you could, right? Because just as we affirm all the artistic contents, right? Contents that kind of
Mhm.
like, you don't have to be technical in terms of, being able to do, computational elements or highfalutin, we affirm scholars when they show a glimmer of, oh, that boy can sing, right? We all in,
Mhm.
right? Athletics, we all in. So we have to begin to affirm scholars who show definite acumen for mathematics and a love for it, and make sure that they eventually feed them through that pipeline to become those representations that we've been talking about not having for our scholars. All right, all right, let me not get on my soapbox. So
No, I agree because there's a lot of problem solvers who may not be as good as with the skill and drill type stuff that get overlooked. Like
right,
they are able to solve things. Like even when you were talking about, some of the street pharmacists, a
right.
lot of them have a lot of skills and abilities that their teachers probably overlooked. Like,
And they were right. And then years later, when they finally got figured it out and got themselves together, they're running their own this and their own that. And you're going, oh wow. you know so yeah. So practical takeaways. Let's start looking at some practical takeaways. Let's give our leaders and educators three immediate actions they can take tomorrow as far as this conversation is concerned.
so making sure that you're providing your students with a challenging grade level curriculum, that you are teaching them what is supposed to be taught for those standards, and that you're making sure that you're focused on algebra readiness. So even when you're looking at all of the standards in there, that you're thinking about where they need to be as far as
Mm-hmm.
being prepared for algebra. Because algebra is the gatekeeper to all of the other mathematics. So
Okay.
if you're not successful in algebra, chances are you're not going to be able to move beyond that math.
Okay. Okay. And what are the others? Other two more, two more. We want a three
Um,
piece. It's like KFC. I
okay,
want a three piece.
so our teachers need to be acknowledge their implicit bias, and after acknowledging that, being able to support our students and
Mm,
being confident and building those academic abilities. And so you have to believe in the students that you have in front of you. That's important. That's
absolutely.
one of the things that I always put at the beginning of the school year, like as my non-negotiables. You have to believe that your students can be successful,
A-
because if you walking in there thinking they're not, that's not a good way. That
that's
there's a
not a good
self-fulfilling
start.
prophecy is gonna happen. Exactly.
That's not a good start at
Exactly.
all. Wow. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So Doc, I'm going to say, you know what? Thank you so much for braving and gracing us with your presence here. I know there was a
I
little
appreciate the invite.
nervousness, right? But before I let you officially go, let's do a quick reflection. If you could leave our audience with one statement about equity in mathematics, what would that be?
So equity is access. Equity is making sure that students have the access to mathematics knowledge, that we're not watering down anything, and that we're just making it available for them, that
Hmm.
everyone has a chance, no matter. And I didn't get to talk about it, but whether you have an IEP or you're a multilingual learner,
Oh, by all
you
means, feel
still should
free
have the
to
same
talk about it.
access.
Listen, we don't have to finish now. You can bring that up because that we did overlook that aspect of scholars and who've already been identified as, and that lack of a better word, they can't do X, they can't do Y, right? And so we'll just in essence marginalize them, which is also that segregated dynamic at play. So yeah, how does that factor into the equation? Talk to me about that.
So within my research, because I have cohorts of students that I was looking at in my research, and so we did have a student with an IEP who has gone on. She did seventh grade pre-algebra, then she did eighth grade algebra, and she's on into the high school, moving on to higher mathematics. And it wasn't an issue. She didn't get the supports as far as having another push-in teacher, but the Algebra 1 teacher acknowledged her IEP and was able to provide her those modifications, and she was still able to do the mathematics. So it wasn't something that hindered her. We have had more of an issue with trying to get our multi-language learners in there, because a lot of times language can be a
A
hindrance as
barrier.
far as, yeah, a barrier if you're not able to understand the English. But the way to really combat that, I haven't been able to do it yet, is having an eighth grade algebra Spanish class that speaks Spanish, or that, has
because
so that opportunity is available.
those scholars, when they come over, a lot of them, math is like the easiest subject for them because that's that universal language. And so I think the language barrier is what hinders their access to those courses. So I guess,
Exactly.
like you said, a Spanish speaking, or figure out how to we could do that, and that's a nice brainstorming exercise for district leaders to engage in, to figure out how do we get these scholars who do have the skill set and acumen for it an opportunity to really get that rigor exposure. So yeah, okay, okay. I thank you for joining me. I appreciate
I
you.
appreciate
But
too.
let's just say this: math should open doors, not close them. When we examine structures, challenge practices, and commit to both equity and excellence, we move closer to a system where opportunity is not predictable by zip code. Right? I think I like that statement. I feel good about that
Yes.
one. I'm gonna pull my collar on that. Right.
That's
But
a
Dr.
good one.
Myla Simmons, thank you for pulling up a seat at the desk. And to our listeners, game changers, continue leading with clarity, courage, and conviction. Until the next time, we'll see you at the desk. Dr. Simmons, you did marvelous.
Thank you. I can breathe now.
You can breathe now.